Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann of Gunpowder Consulting. I am delighted to welcome another fabulous guest to the pod today. Some of our regular listeners will know that in some episodes we've been talking about where we can make marginal gains in some of the more tactical areas of new business and marketing, or broadly agency growth. And then in some episodes we've touched on some bigger, knottier challenges, and specifically when we talked to Blair Enns last year about value pricing and how to price creativity. Also when we chatted to David Meikle about positioning, and probably too in our discussions with Erica Wolfe-Murray about revenue models. And today we're going to take another deep dive and we're going to talk about procurement and specifically the agency relationships with marketing and procurement. So I'm delighted to have in the pod with me today long-standing agency exec and author David Meikle. Welcome to the pod, David.
Thank you very much.
Now, for our listeners, it would be lovely if you could tell us a little bit about your career and what led you to write your brilliant book, How to Buy a Gorilla.
Sure, thank you. My career has mostly been in advertising until I started consulting about 10 years ago. So I worked in some provincial agencies from the very early 90s, and then around about the mid-90s I started my career in London at Grey Advertising. And I learnt the ropes there in terms of account management and rose through the ranks to Ogilvy in 2000 to work on BP, on their global brand and on the launch of BP Connect and their new identity. And then for reasons that still remain a bit of a mystery to me, except that perhaps it's because I always regretted never going on the French exchange at school. In 2003, I moved to Russia and became group managing director and head of country for Ogilvy Russia.
That's an extreme reaction to not going on the French exchange trip.
With the benefit of hindsight, I'd agree. But I remember on the 24th of November 2003, looking out of my hotel room over the Moskva River as the city was covered in snow, after my first day saying, "Oh my God, what have I done?" But it turned out to be a great 4 years. So the agency grew massively from 60 people to 185 people in 4 years. And we became the top position for most of our clients on their rosters and the biggest creative services group for WPP in the market, from a position of being the lowest on all of the client rosters and the smallest. It was a great time, and I learnt a lot, particularly about client agency relations, as you might imagine.
Yes.
And then returning to the UK just in time for Lehman Brothers to collapse.
Right.
I thought, well, actually, maybe now's the time to do something that had bothered me for a while, which was getting really under the skin of the client-agency relationship. And like most people in the advertising world, at one time or another, particularly in account management, you spend quite a lot of time in bars saying, what if? What if clients weren't horrible? What if clients really understood us? And you always sound a bit like, the my wife doesn't understand me, sad alcoholic, midlife crisis man. But we always stopped because there was always a point at which you couldn't see beyond your own agency's agenda. So when I left Ogilvy Russia and I came back to the UK, and after a bit of time off to recover, I really turned myself to that task. But the liberation that I had was that I didn't care what the answer was.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have an investment in it being actually what you need to do is be nice to agencies, or actually what you need to do is pay agencies properly. Yeah. Because I didn't know if that was the answer or not. So I set myself the task of how do you create better value in the client agency relationship model, be that in creative advertising agencies or media agencies or design agencies, it didn't really matter. But in an agency where the agency's service is to provide solutions to problems that have unlimited possible solutions. And that was kind of how I defined it. And I spent a long time, I did consulting work, and at the same time I was developing this paradigm for the whole triangular relationship between marketing agencies and procurement, which after a number of years I finally thought, well, I really need to write this into a book. So that's how to Buy a Gorilla was born.
Okay. Now, because this is a podcast and not a video, so listeners can't see the brilliant front cover of your book, although it will be on the accompanying blog post, we should explain a bit about the gorilla.
Yes, I think that's absolutely fair enough. I remember in about 2010, I had a meeting with ISBA, the Incorporated Society of British Advertisers, with their head of consultancy then, who was Debbie Morrison.
Yeah.
And she was telling me that at the time, clients on the new business circuit who were looking for agents kept saying, we want to buy a gorilla. Actually, they said, we want to buy a gorilla or a meerkat, but How to Buy a Gorilla or a Meerkat didn't make such a snappy title.
No.
So
Amazing.
So How to Buy a Gorilla. And what she was referencing was the Cadbury Gorilla ad, which had broken 3 years previously. So still 3 years after it had broken, people were still saying that that's the ad that they wanted to buy. And my observation to her was that most clients' processes and most clients' stakeholder management and most clients' investment strategies prohibit them from being able to buy a gorilla.
Yeah.
And that actually anyone can, they just have to know how. And that's what then became a nice shorthand for breakthrough ideas, if you like. So a gorilla doesn't necessarily have to be an epic 90-second TV commercial. It can be a great piece of design, or it can be a radical media plan. It can be anything at all, but something that breaks molds, something that does something unconventional with great dramatic effect.
And not even necessarily including an animal, we should say.
No, absolutely. No, it's not limited to animals at all. No.
Brilliant. I'm interested in that you say that when you came to this, because you weren't running an agency, you had no agenda, you had no investment, so it didn't matter what the answer is. So it's a really honest look at what's going on behind all of those relationships between marketeers, procurement and agencies, and really how when they're working optimally, it absolutely can result in that fantastic value. But more often than not, it's working suboptimally. And can easily become dysfunctional. I wonder if there are any specific examples you've got of how that tends to creep in.
Well, specific examples are perhaps difficult, but as a generalisation, if we consider this triangle of, well, as I've referenced it many times, this triangle of doom, which exists between agencies and marketers and procurement. The problem is that in the most basic negotiation terms, they don't have a clear shared interest in their collaboration. To expound a little on that, many agencies, particularly creative agencies, are struggling financially for margin. So they are having to appear confident, they're having to appear successful, but at the same time they are drowning, not waving. They are under pressure from procurement to reduce their costs, and they are under pressure from marketers to retain the marketing business and to be more and more accountable for the performance of that marketing. If you then take marketers, they have a relationship with both procurement and the agency. The day-to-day relationship with the agency has become a lot more command and control, a lot more codified in terms of a specific process of how we do things, a lot less instinctive, shall we say. So there's a lot more onus on the burden of proof that an idea will test and pre-test in any kind of category before it goes out. So there's a lot of risk aversion. And their relationship with procurement can either be those procurement people are hamstringing me and making my life very difficult, which is one end of the scale, and the other end of the scale is they're very useful attack dogs that I can use to get my suppliers to reduce their costs so I can do more with the money. And procurement are in the last corner, and they obviously have a reciprocal relationship with marketing, and they have a relationship with agencies. And from the procurement perspective, marketers are these, well, on one end of the scale, they can partner well with marketing, and there are a few organisations that have done a lot of good work by moving procurement into marketing. But in most organisations, marketing are kind of profligate, irresponsible, people who spend money without really knowing how we're going to get money back for it. And therefore, we need to protect our organisation from marketing. And agencies, likewise, are rip-off merchants who spend too much money on table football and ping-pong tables in their offices in Soho. And really, they need to be a bit more practical and pragmatic. So, they put on their crash helmets and they pick up their baseball bats and they go and negotiate with agencies. So, as a broad generalisation, agencies want more money and more control. Marketers want less money and greater return. And procurement just want to spend less money. So their interests are at best divergent and at worst mutually exclusive. Yet into that triangle of doom, organisations are investing millions and millions of pounds, either directly or indirectly, in the effectiveness of the work that they collaborate to create, which, when you frame it like that, sounds utterly insane and the most hostile environment in which to try and collaborate. I mean, if you just look at the way that two opposing parties are trying to collaborate at the moment,
yes.
It's an easy parallel to see that it's very difficult then to create something.
Yes.
When you're starting from opposing positions and conflicting interests. So what How to Buy Guerrilla is about saying, okay, let's start with the business problem. What is the nature of the business problem? The nature of the client's brand position in terms of market share, in terms of competitive threat. And that would then define investment levels and the risk profile, the necessary role of creativity, if you like, so that we can then design the relationships between marketing, procurement and agencies to make it optimal for the solution of that problem.
So I'm particularly interested to explore the implications for agencies in how they deal with procurement. I'm thinking particularly around some of the smaller creative agencies, usually agencies that are led by a creative person, creative director, and then they're going into battle with procurement of a Unilever or a Diageo or a PepsiCo, and that's quite tough. That's really tough. How should they navigate that?
It can feel like an uphill struggle, particularly for smaller agencies dealing with large organisations. And there are a few things to consider here. First, that procurement negotiate for a living. It's pretty much, I mean, they'll say it's not all they do, but it is a very large part of what they do. And therefore, you have to know what you're doing if you're going to negotiate with them. The second problem is, and this was something that I encountered when I was working with a group of procurement people at ISBA and a training session. I began the training session by saying, how many people here are responsible for negotiating marketing services contracts for their clients? And 10 hands of big blue chip companies went up around the room. My follow-up question was, how many people here are accountable for the performance of the marketing services that they procure? And 10 hands went down. So the problem that you have is that you are negotiating with someone who isn't responsible and has no particular investment in the quality of the outcome, unless it is discretionary responsibility that they're taking on, or marketing gets involved. And the third problem is that we, as an industry, and I say we because I always project back to when I was running an agency myself, we tend to accept a lot of premises to the challenges that are made to us, insofar as, to start with, we accept the language of cost.
Yeah.
We say, so how much does this cost? Actually, it isn't a cost. It's an investment. If you're paying an agency a fee, be it for a corporate identity, a piece of packaging, a 30-second TV commercial, a media plan, it doesn't matter. All of these are problems with unlimited possible solutions. And therefore you can pay very little for it and find someone who will do very little amount, or you can pay a lot for it and you can find a big established agency that will do it. And the difference is that if you've got a small unproven agency that's been in business for 3 months, then you are accepting a level of risk for a reduced price. If you are paying a big established agency with a big established reputation, then you are paying for a reduced risk. And that's the way any investment works. So if we accept the language of cost, then we accept that we need to be scrutinised as a cost. But agency services aren't a cost. They need to be priced. And this is where I think that the work of people that you've had on the show before, like Blair Enns a year ago, the work of Ron Baker and Tim Williams in value-based pricing has really moved the game on. But you have to choose to engage on that intellectual level, and therefore the uphill battle can be plateaued, and you can be on a level playing field saying we oughtn't to be fighting each other. We ought to be talking about your investment strategy. And if your investment strategy is you want higher risk for lower cost, then yes, we can spend less time working on the brand strategy, we can spend less time working on the design, we can spend less time interrogating your market for a new proposition. We can just go much more quickly, but recognise that will cost less to you as a, what you're calling a cost, but it will increase your risk. And if we have conversations about risk and investment and cost, rather than just accepting that this is a cost and that the quality is assured, then we can have a different conversation. And I do a lot of work with agencies about reframing the way that they think about going into negotiations. And by doing so, you're reframing the conversation around value rather than opening yourself to scrutiny as to how you might be arriving at figures that you're then presenting and trying to justify.
And just on that point, actually, I'm interested just to explore your consultancy. Are you advising all parties in that triangle?
I am.
You are. Brilliant.
It's kind of funny, and it's a question that does come up, because usually you'll find consultants who will only work with marketing, or they'll only work with agencies, and they do that because of what is a perceived conflict of interest. But because I'm only acting in the pursuit of value, whatever that definition of value is, I and my clients are all comfortable that I can work in any corner of that triangle, or any combination of the corners of that triangle, in the pursuit of value, using the framework that I've devised. Because the answer is always going to be, is that suitable for the client's business problem? Be that if I'm improving an agency's ability to negotiate, they're only going to be able to do that if it's in the pursuit of better value for the client. They're not just going to be able to suddenly charge a king's ransom for something that isn't worth a king's ransom. That's not how negotiation works. So by pursuing the right answers, it means that you can work objectively in any corner of the triangle. And so far, I mean, I'm very transparent with all of my clients about who I work with. So, if, for example, I was running a creative pitch, as I did recently, I said to the client which are the agencies I knew, who are the people I used to work with in these agencies, and I said to the agencies themselves when they were shortlisted, I said, you ought to be aware that I've worked in the past with somebody who's the CEO over there, and I've known the creative director over here. But that openness, that transparency, gave everyone a lot more confidence that there wasn't any silly business going on, that it is a level playing field, and that all we're doing is in the open and transparent pursuit of greater value.
And I would imagine in a world where actually nothing really stays the same, the fact that you are having detailed conversations and detailed exposure to procurement challenges, marketing challenges, agency challenges all the time, the learnings that you're getting from those individual businesses continues to refine and refine and refine, and everybody gets the benefit from that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's also really useful to have the framework that I've developed have its tires kicked constantly through constant application and use. And it does get refined. I don't think that the framework gets any tighter. The framework itself, which I call the monkey house, is necessarily loose because it needs to be able to accommodate brands as diverse as, something like Burberry to Dixon's Carphone. And you can't use the same ideas of creativity and the same ideas of process and the same ideas of investment for, Chanel and Homebase. It just makes no sense at all. So it's necessarily loose, but I suppose that the constant exposure to procurement means that I have to find how new things that I'm exposed to fit in, and how they fit in depending upon the kind of business problem that we're trying to solve. And that's really useful. I mean, I love to continue to learn and evolve the work that I'm doing. Yeah.
Great. I'd be interested to know what your top 3 tips would be for agency founders today, based on everything that you've learned.
I think one of the first things would be to really get to grips with what value is, and to try and do that from a buyer's perspective rather than from the perspective of what it is that you're selling. To give you an example, and I do some work with the Market Research Society on negotiation training with them, and it came up in one of the sessions there that they were saying that a procurement person was negotiating really hard and trying to get our costs down. And I said, well, that's a bit like deciding what to spend your money on before you start a trans-Saharan rally and concluding that what you should do is buy a shittier map. Sorry for my language. But actually, that it is insane to be looking at the bottom end of your spend spectrum at something which informs everything else that is on that spend spectrum in your marketing mix. And that if you think about value, not just in terms of the price that you're charging, but in terms of the dependency that the rest of the marketing mix has on what it is that you're doing, and not only that, but the ROI on the rest of that marketing mix, then actually what you're looking at is what Ron Baker would call a massive buyer's profit. So the value of what it is that they're buying is exponentially higher than the price that they're paying for it, even if procurement think that price is high. So you need to think about value in terms of the criticality of what it is that you're doing, rather than necessarily the price that someone's paying for it. And when you look at some large organisations, and I still hear stories of them doing it, when they give junior brand managers a piece of packaging to pitch so they can get some pitching practice, you kind of think that is the epitome of criticality. Someone walks into a supermarket, you've spent 30 million quid getting them to think automatically about your brand, and then the packaging lets it down and they buy a competitor. And you see it in Nielsen sales charts all the time. Yes, your advertising had an effect. It grew the market. People aren't thinking about value the way that they ought to. So that would be thing number one.
I've just got to say, I think we've got quite a big design audience here.
So I do weddings, birthdays, bar mitzvahs.
They're probably going to be cheering at that particular example. But yes, do carry on.
So that would be number one, separate value from price and cost, and think about their perspective in terms of risk and return, and don't be afraid to have the risk conversation, would be the second one. The biggest one for me is that any marketing services organisation in any discipline, pretty much, although it's slightly changing, but almost all, haven't got a machine that creates value. They only have people who can create value, who have those ideas, who develop those strategies. And therefore, the best proxy for agency value in new business that I've found is actually the strength of your employer brand, rather than how much you're splashed all over whichever magazine. If you can say to somebody in procurement, people come to our organisation and they don't leave. We attract the best people, and this is our evidence for that. These are the things that we do that keep them here. That is the best proxy for value when you're trying to measure value for something that doesn't yet exist, is that we've got those people. And essentially that's always been the case, but we've lost sight of that quite a lot. And I would go back to that. And that's why when you talk with clients about holiday policy, paternity policy, maternity policy, you talk about training investment and how that's ring-fenced in your balance sheet, all of these sorts of things. These sorts of things are important, and if you can frame all of that by saying, as a result, we get the best talent who therefore are motivated and create the greatest value for our clients, and therefore we don't lose our clients and we don't lose our talent.
Bingo.
What else do you want?
I am interested where you see the opportunity for marginal gains.
The marginal gains I would look for are the reversal of what has been a series of marginal losses that I think have happened over the last 30 years. Procurement came out of nowhere. I mean, in the 60s, they saved the car manufacturing market in the US, and CEOs saw that procurement can, in heavy inverted commas, because I'm not on video, create value. And as a result, this and particularly as the triangle was formed, there have been lots of defensive protective behaviours and even aggressive behaviours between marketing, procurement and agencies that on a small scale, on an individual level, we've let go. All right, I'll let you audit my timesheets. All right, you can do an overhead audit of what it is that we do and how we calculate that. All right, you can have approval on the appointment of your next account director. All of these sorts of things are ways in which agencies have relinquished control of their own businesses to clients in a process of appeasement.
Yes.
And this process of appeasement, not standing up for yourself, appeasement, in a negotiation book, I wish I could credit it because it's a great line. Appeasement is throwing steaks to a tiger in the hope that it will become vegetarian.
Right.
You cannot operate on that level.
No.
You have to be prepared to say no. And just think about the small things and the principle of what it is that you're responsible for. Because if you're responsible for your agency, you need to have control over it.
Yeah.
Because responsibility and control have got to reside in the same place. And a number of these things, you can negotiate back that control by saying, well, if you want to control it, you'll take responsibility for it. And therefore, rather than thinking of marginal gains in a number of sort of isolated ways, I would say my overall approach would be to reverse those marginal losses and do it under the lens of, if this is my responsibility, I control it and I get to say no.
Brilliant. Love that. We're going to be giving away a copy of your brilliant book.
You don't want to sell it?
We'll give away one
right,
one
one's
copy
okay.
to a lucky listener. And listeners, you know what to do. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory, and we will pick a winner and send a copy of David's book, How to Buy a Gorilla. It's a fascinating read, whichever side of the triangle you are on. It's going to give you much greater understanding of how those relationships can work better. But I'm interested if there are any other books that you would recommend to our listeners, or a TED Talk.
Anyone in marketing services who hasn't read Win Without Pitching Manifesto by Blair Enns, shame on you.
Indeed.
Just secretly go and buy it and read it and make sure you're up to speed.
Yeah.
Equally, Pricing Creativity that he released last year. And Ron Baker, who Ron and Blair and I all spoke at the ICA in Toronto last May, and Ron was launching his book and Blair was launching his book and I was launching mine. But Ron's book is Implementing Value Pricing, which is also an excellent read. And he's done a hell of a lot of work in that area, even from the field of accountancy rather than creative services.
Great.
But he understands the creative services market extremely well. He's done a lot of work with Tim Williams, who's written books like Take a Stand for Your Brand, and Tim does a lot of work about how to build pricing councils in your organisation and how to really bridge that knowing-doing gap between, I know we ought to move to value-based pricing, but how do we do it? So they're all in that area, and I think it's a key point of being able to wrestle back control from heavy-handed clients to being able to run your own business profitably. On the procurement side, there's a shorter read called Buying Less for Less, which is by Jerry Preece and Russell Walworth. And Russell Walworth, I think, is ex-McCann. And Jerry Preece used to be the global procurement director for Procter & Gamble. And that's an interesting read and gives you some insight into the procurement world. So I would certainly look at those in particular, yeah.
Fab. Well, we'll link through to all of those in the blog. My last question, I'm interested which piece of advice you've been given in your career that stuck with you the most.
Years and years ago, I worked in a design agency in Birmingham. Very early 90s, I think it was. And it was one of those unfortunate positions when I had a big personality clash with my managing director. Mm-hmm. And the chap who had hired me had left the organisation. And I was getting a really, really tough time from the MD, who was basically, asking my colleagues how he could justify firing me. Really very unpleasant environment. And very, very demotivating. And I met this chap whose name was Gareth Morgan for coffee. And the piece of advice he gave me after I explained my situation, he said, never let anybody else doubt your own ability.
Oh, I like that.
And I thought, yeah, fair enough. I'll pocket that one.
Yeah, lovely.
and I'm glad to share it because it has been, at moments of self-doubt, you can allow yourself a little bit of self-doubt, and I think it's healthy. And I think it's smarter to be able to doubt yourself than to have unending confidence. But to let somebody else doubt your ability to do something or not, I think is unreasonable. And that got me out of a difficult spot at a time when I felt particularly vulnerable, and thought, actually, I won't.
So what did you do?
I took another job, funnily enough. I took a marketing job, and then that led to my career in London. So it all worked out rather well.
It was all uphill from there.
Yes.
Brilliant. David, you've been a superb guest. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It really is an amazing book, so I would recommend that everybody get a copy. All the links are on the blog, and details of where you can get hold of David for more of his words of wisdom.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory. This podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann, and edited and produced by Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Duke Deck, available at dukedeck.com, and this episode was recorded at The Pod at White City Place. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com. And if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.